Part IV of Cratylus by Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Hermogenes. What do you say of hedone, pleasure, lupe, pain, epithumia, desire, and the like, Socrates? Socrates. I do not think, Hermogenes, that there is any great difficulty about them. Hedone is he onesis, the action which tends to advantage, and the original form may be supposed to have been heone, but this has been altered by the insertion of the delta. Lupe appears to be derived from the relaxation luein, which the body feels when in sorrow. Ania, trouble, is the hindrance of motion, alpha and ianai. Algedon, distress, if I am not mistaken, is a foreign word, which is derived from algenos, grievous. Audinai, grief, is called from the putting on, and ducis, sorrow. In akthedon, vexation, the word too labors, as any one may see. Chara, joy, is the very expression of the fluency and diffusion of the soul, chea. Terpsis, delight, is so called from the pleasure creeping, herpon, through the soul, which may be likened to a breath, pnoe, and is properly herpnun, but has been altered by time into terpnon. Euphrosune, cheerfulness, and epithumia explain themselves. The former, which ought to be eupherosune, and has been changed into euphrosune, is named, as every one may see, from the soul moving, pheresthai, in harmony with nature. Epithumia is really he epiton thumon iusa dunamis, the power which enters into the soul. Thumos, passion, is called from the rushing, thuseos, and boiling of the soul. Himeros, desire, denotes the stream, hrus, which most draws the soul. Dia ten hesin, tes, proes, because flowing with desire, hiemenos, and expresses a longing after things, and violent attraction of the soul to them, and is termed himeros from possessing this power. Pathos, longing, is expressive of the desire of that which is not present but absent, and in another place, pu. This is the reason why the name pathos is applied to things absent, as himeros is to things present. Eros, love, is so called because flowing in, esthron, from without. The stream is not inherent, but is an influence introduced through the eyes, and from flowing in was called esthros, influx, in the old time when they used omicron for omega, and is called eros now that omega is substituted for omicron. But why do you not give me another word? Hermogenes. What do you think of doxa, opinion, and that class of words? Socrates. Doxa is either derived from dioxis, pursuit, and expresses the march of the soul in the pursuit of knowledge, or from the shooting of a bow, toxon. The latter is more likely, and is confirmed by oesis, thinking, which is only oesis, moving, and implies the movement of the soul to the essential nature of each thing, just as boule, counsel, has to do with shooting, bole, and boulesthai, to wish, combines the notion of aiming and deliberating. All these words seem to follow doxa, and all involve the idea of shooting, just as abulia, absence of counsel, on the other hand, is a mishap or missing, or mistaking of the mark, or aim, or proposal, or object. Hermogenes. You are quickening your pace now, Socrates. Socrates. Why, yes. The end I now dedicate to God; not, however, until I have explained anagke, necessity, which ought to come next, and hekusion, the voluntary. Hekusion is certainly the yielding, heikon, and unresisting. The notion implied is yielding, and not opposing, yielding, as I was just now saying, to that motion which is in accordance with our will. But the necessary and resistant being contrary to our will implies error and ignorance. The idea is taken from walking through a ravine which is impassable, and rugged, and overgrown, and impedes motion, and this is the derivation of the word anankaion, necessary, an, anke, ion, going through a ravine. But while my strength lasts, let us persevere, and I hope that you will persevere with your questions. Her. Well then, let me ask about the greatest and noblest, such as aletheia, truth, and pseudos, falsehood, and on, being, not forgetting to inquire why the word onoma, name, which is the theme of our discussion, has the name of onoma. Socrates, you know the word maesthai, to seek? Her. Yes, meaning the same as zetein, to inquire. Socrates, the word onoma seems to be a compressed sentence, signifying on, who, zetema, being for which there is a search, as is still more obvious in onomaston, notable, which states in so many words that real existence is that for which there is a seeking, on, who, masma. Aletheia is also an agglomeration of theia, ale, divine wandering, implying the divine motion of existence. Pseudos, falsehood, is the opposite of motion. Here is another ill name given by the legislator to stagnation and forced inaction, which he compares to sleep, eldein. But the original meaning of the word is disguised by the addition of ψ. On and ousia are ion with an iota broken off. This agrees with the true principle, for being, on, is also moving, ion, and the same may be said of not being, which is likewise called not going, oukion, or ouki, on, equals ouk, ion. Hermogenes, you have hammered away at them manfully, but suppose that some one were to say to you, what is the word ion, and what are rhehon and dun? Show me their fitness. Socrates, you mean to say, how should I answer him? Hermogenes, yes. Socrates, one way of giving the appearance of an answer has been already suggested. Hermogenes, what way? Socrates, to say that names which we do not understand are of foreign origin. And this is very likely the right answer, and something of this kind may be true of them. But also the original forms of words may have been lost in the lapse of ages. Names have been so twisted in all manner of ways, that I should not be surprised if the old language, when compared with that now in use, would appear to us to be a barbarous tongue. Hermogenes, very likely. Socrates, yes, very likely. But still the enquiry demands our earnest attention, and we must not flinch. For we should remember that if a person go on analyzing names into words, and inquiring also into the elements out of which the words are formed, and keeps on always repeating this process, he who has to answer him must at last give up the inquiry in despair. Hermogenes, very true. Socrates, and at what point ought he to lose heart and give up the inquiry? Must he not stop when he comes to the names which are the elements of all other names and sentences? For these cannot be supposed to be made up of other names. The word agathon, good, for example, is, as we were saying, a compound of agastos, admirable, and zoos, swift, and probably thos is made up of other elements, and these again of others. But if we take a word which is incapable of further resolution, then we shall be right in saying that we have at last reached a primary element, which need not be resolved any further. Hermogenes, I believe you to be in the right. Socrates, and suppose the names about which you are now asking should turn out to be primary elements, must not their truth or law be examined according to some new method? Hermogenes, Very likely. Socrates. Quite so, Hermogenes. All that has preceded would lead to this conclusion, and if, as I think, the conclusion is true, then I shall again say to you, come and help me, that I may not fall into some absurdity in stating the principle of primary names. Her. Let me hear, and I will do my best to assist you. Soc. I think that you will acknowledge with me that one principle is applicable to all names, primary as well as secondary. When they are regarded simply as names, there is no difference in them. Her. Certainly not. Soc. All the names that we have been explaining were intended to indicate the nature of things. Her. Of course. Soc. And that this is true of the primary quite as much as of the secondary names is implied in their being names. Her. Surely. Soc. But the secondary, as I conceive, derive their significance from the primary. Her. That is evident. Soc. Very good. But then how do the primary names, which precede analysis, show the natures of things as far as they can be shown, which they must do if they are to be real names? And here I will ask you a question. Suppose that we had no voice or tongue, and wanted to communicate with one another, should we not, like the deaf and dumb, make signs with the hands and head and the rest of the body? Her. There would be no choice, Socrates. Soc. We should imitate the nature of the thing. The elevation of our hands to heaven would mean lightness and upwardness. Heaviness and downwardness would be expressed by letting them drop to the ground. If we were describing the running of a horse or any other animal, we should make our bodies and our gestures as like as we could to them. Her. I do not see that we could do anything else. Soc. We could not, for by bodily imitation only can the body ever express anything. Her. Very true. Soc. And when we want to express ourselves either with the voice, or tongue, or mouth, the expression is simply their imitation of that which we want to express. Her. It must be so, I think. Soc. Then a name is a vocal imitation of that which the vocal imitator names or imitates? Her. I think so. Soc. Nay, my friend, I am disposed to think that we have not reached the truth as yet. Her. Why not? Soc. Because if we have, we shall be obliged to admit that the people who imitate sheep, or cocks, or other animals, name that which they imitate. Her. Quite true. Soc. Then could I have been right in what I was saying? Her. In my opinion, no. But I wish that you would tell me, Socrates, what sort of an imitation is a name. Soc. In the first place, I should reply, not a musical imitation, although that is also vocal, nor again an imitation of what music imitates. These, in my judgment, would not be naming. Let me put the matter as follows. All objects have sound and figure, and many have color. Her. Certainly. Soc. But the art of naming appears not to be concerned with imitations of this kind. The arts which have to do with them are music and drawing. Her. True. Soc. Again, is there not an essence of each thing, just as there is a color or sound? And is there not an essence of color and sound as well as of anything else which may be said to have an essence? Her. I should think so. Soc. Well, and if any one could express the essence of each thing in letters and syllables, would he not express the nature of each thing? Her. Quite so. Soc. The musician and the painter were the two names which you gave to the two other imitators. What will this imitator be called? Her. I imagine, Socrates, that he must be the namer, or name-giver, of whom we are in search. Soc. If this is true, then I think that we are in a condition to consider the names (rhoe, stream; ianai, to go; scesis, retention), about which you were asking, and we may see whether the namer has grasped the nature of them in letters and syllables in such a manner as to imitate the essence or not. Her. Very good. Soc. But are these the only primary names, or are there others? Her. There must be others. Soc. So I should expect. But how shall we further analyze them, and where does the imitator begin? Imitation of the essence is made by syllables and letters. Ought we not, therefore, first to separate the letters, just as those who are beginning rhythm first distinguish the powers of elementary and then of compound sounds, and when they have done so, but not before, they proceed to the consideration of rhythms? Her. Yes. Soc. Must we not begin in the same way with letters, first separating the vowels, and then the consonants and mutes, into classes, according to the received distinctions of the learned? Also the semivowels, which are neither vowels nor yet mutes, and distinguishing into classes the vowels themselves. And when we have perfected the classification of things, we shall give them names, and see whether, as in the case of letters, there are any classes to which they may all be referred. And hence we shall see their natures, and see, too, whether they have in them classes, as there are in the letters. And when we have well considered all this, we shall know how to apply them to what they resemble, whether one letter is used to denote one thing, or whether there is to be an admixture of several of them, just as in painting the painter who wants to depict anything sometimes uses purple only, or any other color, and sometimes mixes up several colors, as his method is when he has to paint flesh color, or anything of that kind. He uses his colors as his figures appear to require them, and so too we shall apply letters to the expression of objects, either single letters when required, or several letters, and so we shall form syllables, as they are called, and from syllables make nouns and verbs, and thus at last, from the combinations of nouns and verbs, arrive at language, large and fair and whole. And as the painter made a figure, even so shall we make speech by the art of the namer or the rhetorician, or by some other art. Not that I am literally speaking of ourselves, but I was carried away, meaning to say that this was the way in which, not we, but the ancients formed language, and what they put together we must take to pieces in like manner, if we are to attain a scientific view of the whole subject. And we must see whether the primary and also whether the secondary elements are rightly given or not. For if they are not, the composition of them, my dear Hermogenes, will be a sorry piece of work, and in the wrong direction. Her. That, Socrates, I can quite believe. Soc. Well, but do you suppose that you will be able to analyze them in this way? For I am certain that I should not. Her. Much less am I likely to be able. Soc. Shall we leave them then, or shall we seek to discover if we can something about them according to the measure of our ability, saying by way of preface, as I said before of the gods, that of the truth about them we know nothing, and do but entertain human notions of them? And in this present enquiry let us say to ourselves, before we proceed, that the higher method is the one which we or others who would analyze language to any good purpose must follow. But under the circumstances, as men say, we must do as well as we can. What do you think? Her. I very much approve. Soc. That objects should be imitated in letters and syllables, and so find expression, may appear ridiculous, Hermogenes, but it cannot be avoided. There is no better principle to which we can look for the truth of first names. Deprived of this, we must have recourse to divine help, like the tragic poets, who in any perplexity have their gods waiting in the air, and must get out of our difficulty in like fashion by saying that the gods gave the first names, and therefore they are right. This will be the best contrivance, or perhaps that other notion may be even better still, of deriving them from some barbarous people, for the barbarians are older than we are. Or we may say that antiquity has cast a veil over them, which is the same sort of excuse as the last. For all these are not reasons, but only ingenious excuses for having no reasons concerning the truth of words. And yet any sort of ignorance of first or primitive names involves an ignorance of secondary words, for they can only be explained by the primary. Clearly, then, the professor of languages should be able to give a very lucid explanation of first names, or, let him be assured, he will only talk nonsense about the rest. Do you not suppose this to be true? Her. Certainly, Socrates. Socrates. My first notions of original names are truly wild and ridiculous, though I have no objection to impart them to you if you desire, and I hope that you will communicate to me in return anything better which you may have. Her. Fear not, I will do my best. Soc. In the first place, the letter ρ appears to me to be the general instrument expressing all motion, kinesis. But I have not yet explained the meaning of this latter word, which is just iesis, going. For the letter eta was not in use among the ancients, who only employed epsilon, and the root is kiein, which is a foreign form, the same as ienai, and the old word kinesis will be correctly given as iesis in corresponding modern letters. Assuming this foreign root, kiein, and allowing for the change of the eta in the insertion of the nu, we have kinesis, which should have been kienesis or hesis, and stasis is the negative of ienai or hesis, and has been improved into stasis. Now the letter ρ, as I was saying, appears to the imposer of names an excellent instrument for the expression of motion, and he frequently uses the letter for this purpose. For example, in the actual words ρειν and ροι, he represents motion by ρ. Also in the words τρόμος, trembling, trachus, rugged, and again in words such as κρούειν, strike, thraoin, crush, edekain, bruise, thruptein, break, karmatazein, crumble, hrumbein, whirl. Of all these sorts of movements he generally finds an expression in the letter ρ, because, as I imagine, he had observed that the tongue was most agitated and least at rest in the pronunciation of this letter, which he therefore used in order to express motion, just as by the letter iota he expresses the subtle elements which pass through all things. This is why he uses the letter iota as imitative of motion. Ienai, hiesthai. And there is another class of letters, phi, psi, sigma, and zeta, of which the pronunciation is accompanied by great expenditure of breath. These are used in the imitation of such notions as ψυχρον, shivering, zeon, seething, sesthai, to be shaken, seismos, shock, and are always introduced by the giver of names when he wants to imitate what is phusades, windy. He seems to have thought that the closing and pressure of the tongue in the utterance of A and τ was expressive of binding and rest in a place. He further observed the liquid movement of A in the pronunciation of which the tongue slips, and in this he found the expression of smoothness, as in λέος, level, and in the word olίσθανειν, to slip itself, λίπαρον, sleek, in the word καλώδες, gluey, and the like. The heavier sound of gamma detained the slipping tongue, and the union of the two gave the notion of a glutinous, clammy nature, as in glyskros, glukos, gloides. The nu he observed to be sounded from within, and therefore to have a notion of inwardness. Hence he introduced the sound in endon and entos. Alpha he assigned to the expression of size, and eta of length, because they are great letters. Omicron was the sign of roundness, and therefore there is plenty of omicron mixed up in the word gongolon, round. Thus did the legislator, reducing all things into letters and syllables, and impressing on them names and signs, and out of them by imitation compounding other signs. That is my view, Hermogenes, of the truth of names, but I should like to hear what Cratylus has more to say. Her. But, Socrates, as I was telling you before, Cratylus mystifies me. He says that there is a fitness of names, but he never explains what is this fitness, so that I cannot tell whether his obscurity is intended or not. Tell me now, Cratylus, here in the presence of Socrates, do you agree in what Socrates has been saying about names, or have you something better of your own? And if you have, tell me what your view is, and then you will either learn of Socrates, or Socrates and I will learn of you. Crat. Well, but surely, Hermogenes, you do not suppose that you can learn, or I explain, any subject of importance all in a moment? At any rate, not such a subject as language, which is perhaps the very greatest of all. Her. No, indeed; but as Hesiod says, and I agree with him, to add little to little is worth while. And therefore, if you think that you can add anything at all, however small, to our knowledge, take a little trouble, and oblige Socrates, and me too, who certainly have a claim upon you. Soc. I am by no means positive, Cratylus, in the view which Hermogenes and myself have worked out; and therefore do not hesitate to say what you think, which, if it be better than my own view, I shall gladly accept. And I should not be at all surprised to find that you have found some better notion, for you have evidently reflected on these matters, and have had teachers; and if you have really a better theory of the truth of names, you may count me in the number of your disciples. Crat. You are right, Socrates, in saying that I have made a study of these matters, and I might possibly convert you into a disciple; but I fear that the opposite is more probable, and I already find myself moved to say to you what Achilles in the Prayers says to Ajax: Illustrious Ajax, son of Telamon, lord of the people, you appear to have spoken in all things much to my mind. And you, Socrates, appear to me to be an oracle, and to give answers much to my mind, whether you are inspired by Euthyphro, or whether some muse may have long been an inhabitant of your breast, unconsciously to yourself. Soc. Excellent, Cratylus; I have long been wondering at my own wisdom; I cannot trust myself, and I think that I ought to stop and ask myself, what am I saying? For there is nothing worse than self-deception, when the deceiver is always at home and always with you. It is quite terrible, and therefore I ought often to retrace my steps, and endeavour to look fore and aft, in the words of the aforesaid Homer. End of Part IV of Cratylus. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.